They called her the poor girl before she even touched the mic. I heard it from the bleachers, not whispered, but tossed around like a joke. My stomach turned, but I couldn't move. She stood under that harsh gym light, clutching her old guitar, the one we found at a yard sale for $10. Her dress was secondhand, her shoes a size too big, yet she stood there anyway. The laughter rolled through the room, sharp and cruel, and I sat frozen, wondering if courage always had to look this painful. Ruby had been practicing that song for weeks, sometimes before school, sometimes after dinner, when the radiator clanged louder than her guitar. I used to listen from the kitchen, pretending to wash dishes just to hear her voice carry through the thin walls. It wasn't perfect. Her chords buzzed, her pitch cracked. But she sang with something I hadn't heard in a long time: belief. We didn't have much. Our little apartment sat above a laundromat that never slept. At night, the hum of machines became her metronome. Her guitar came from a yard sale. The man sold it for $10 because one string was missing. Ruby didn't complain. She fixed it herself with fishing lines, smiling like she'd just built something brand new. She said music made the small room feel bigger. When the school announced the annual Jefferson Middle Talent Show, she taped the flyer to the fridge. "I think I want to do it," she said, trying to sound casual. I looked at her hair pulled back. Sleeves rolled that spark in her eyes, and I knew she'd already decided. I warned her gently, "Those kids can be cruel." She shrugged. "Maybe, but I'll never know if I don't try." In the days before the show, our home turned into a rehearsal space. She'd practice between homework and dinner, her voice breaking between verses, always starting again. I stitched the small tear on the lavender dress we found at the thrift store. It wasn't new, but when she tried it on, she spun once and said, "This'll do." She never cared about how things looked. She cared about what they meant. The night before the show, I sat by her bed while she tuned the guitar. "You nervous?" I asked. She smiled soft and fearless, a little. "But Miss Parker says I don't need perfect things to be amazing." I didn't know then how much that sentence would matter. The next morning, the gym was packed. Glitter banners hung crookedly, the air thick with excitement and perfume. Kids posed for photos in shiny dresses and suits. Parents carried cameras like trophies. Ruby stood beside me, holding her guitar case with both hands. Her shoes, borrowed from her cousin, flopped slightly as she walked. Still, her chin was high. When her name was called, she squeezed my fingers once and whispered, "I'll be okay, Mom." I believed her. I wanted to. The gym smelled like floor wax and cotton candy, that strange mix of nerves and sugar that only school events seemed to have. The bleachers groaned under the weight of parents and students' phones, ready to capture every moment. I found a seat near the back, close enough to see her face, but far enough that she couldn't see mine shaking. One by one, the performances went on: polished routines, bright costumes, rehearsed smiles. A girl sang a pop song with a band behind her. A boy juggled while his friends cheered. Every act got applause, laughter, a wave of support. And then the MC called the next name. Next up, Ruby Johnson. My daughter stepped into the light alone. Her lavender dress shimmered faintly under the stage bulbs, not because it was fancy, but because she stood tall. The gym fell quiet, but not the good kind. I heard a few whispers from the front rows. Someone snorted. Another kid muttered, "Oh, this should be good." The laughter spread like static. Ruby kept walking. Her guitar looked too big for her small shoulders. She reached the mic stand, adjusted it just like we'd practiced, and exhaled. From where I sat, I could see her knuckles white around the pick. I wanted to scream at them to stop, to tell those kids that courage looks different when you've never had anything handed to you. But I stayed seated, nails digging into my palms. She struck the first chord, a small, uneven sound. A few giggles erupted from the bleachers. My heart clenched. Ruby looked down, adjusted the tuning peg, and tried again. The second chord came smoother, but the laughter didn't stop. Someone whispered something, and another burst of snickering followed. For a second, I thought she'd walk off. Her shoulders trembled. The gym lights flickered against her face, catching the shimmer of unshed tears. She blinked hard, swallowed, and looked out into the crowd, not at anyone in particular, just forward as if searching for a point to hold on to. Then she took a breath. a long, steady one that made the microphone hum slightly. When she sang the first line, her voice cracked. I held my breath, but she didn't stop. Verse by verse, she found herself again. The crowd quieted, not out of respect yet, but confusion. Her voice, still fragile, began to fill the room. She sang about small apartments and starlight through broken windows, about holding on to dreams too big for her hands. Something shifted. Even from the back, I felt it, that fragile kind of silence that happens when people realize they might have misjudged someone. I could see Miss Parker, her teacher, sitting 2 rows ahead. She leaned forward, smiling through tears. Ruby closed her eyes, hands steady now, her voice climbing higher with every word. But just as she reached the chorus, the microphone squealed feedback, blaring through the speakers. The spell broke. Laughter returned, quick and cruel, and that's when I saw her lip tremble, her fingers falter. For the first time that night, I thought she might break. The feedback screeched like a warning siren piercing through the gym. A few kids covered their ears dramatically. Someone shouted, "Nice one," and laughter followed louder this time, careless and cruel. I gripped the metal railing in front of me, the sound of it cold and biting against my palms. Ruby froze. Her shoulders rose and fell, her breath ragged. For a moment, everything inside me wanted to run to her, to stop it all, to take the guitar from her hands, shield her and carry her out of that gym. But something in her stillness stopped me. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She just stood there, staring at the floor like she was deciding something. The MC looked uncertain, glancing toward the judges' table. One of them started to stand, maybe to end the performance, but Ruby suddenly lifted her head. Her eyes found the microphone again. She spoke softly, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "Sorry," she said. "I can start over." The room went quiet, not respectful yet, but expectant, like the audience waiting for another reason to laugh. Ruby adjusted the strap on her shoulder, reached down, and struck the strings again. This time, the sound was cleaner. She took a breath and began to sing from the top. Her voice was low at first, cracked around the edges, but there was something in it, a kind of quiet defiance, that made me sit straighter. Each word carried weight now. I could hear the quiver in her throat when she sang about nights too cold for sleep, about hearing her mother's tired footsteps, and promising herself it would get better. My throat tightened. I hadn't known she'd written about me. Somewhere in the crowd, a cough echoed, then faded. No laughter this time. Even the kids who'd snickered earlier leaned forward, watching. Her voice grew stronger. It wasn't perfect. It wavered, missed a note, but it was raw and true. And that truth filled the gym like a rising tide. The harsh, fluorescent lights softened somehow. Even the banners on the walls seemed to fade into the background. I saw her fingers move with confidence now. The pick no longer shook. The last of her fear burned away in that song, replaced by something fierce and real. When she hit the final chord, the sound lingered longer than it should have, heavy, electric, alive. Then silence. Pure, suspended silence. That's when I noticed him, the man in the back row, standing slowly, his coat dark against the bleachers, watching my daughter with eyes that saw something no one else did. He didn't clap. He didn't move quickly either. He just stood there, calm and deliberate, as the crowd started to murmur. I remember thinking he looked out of place too, composed for a room filled with teenagers shifting in embarrassment. His coat was dark, long, and worn at the cuffs, like it had seen more years than anyone in that gym. Ruby noticed him too. She blinked once, confused, still holding her guitar like a shield. Then the man spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried low, steady cutting through the silence, like it belonged there. "Play it again," he said. At first no one moved. The principal frowned, unsure if he should interfere. Someone whispered, "Who is that guy?" Another student snickered nervously, but the man didn't flinch. "Play it again," he repeated, eyes still on Ruby. I felt my breath catch. Ruby's fingers hovered above the strings. "Sir," she asked, small but clear. He took a step forward, the echo of his shoes snapping in the silence. From the top, he said, "You were finding your truth. Don't stop now." For a moment, it felt as if time forgot to move. Then Ruby nodded not to him exactly, but to herself, and lifted the guitar. The first chord rang out steadier this time. No one laughed. Even the kids who'd mocked her earlier sat frozen. The man closed his eyes, arms folded loosely, listening. Ruby sang again, her voice no longer a whisper, but a declaration. I could feel it building like a storm, finally forming into something powerful instead of chaotic. Every word came sharper, cleaner, as if she'd finally stopped asking for permission to be heard. The verses that once sounded fragile now hit like truth about hunger, about hope, about refusing to let other people's laughter define her worth. And somewhere in the middle of that second song, something in the room changed. The laughter that had filled that gym only minutes ago was gone. In its place, a stillness so heavy it almost vibrated. When she reached the chorus, the part she'd written alone in her room about stars leaking through cracks in the ceiling, her voice soared. I'd never heard her sing like that. Not at home, not in rehearsal, not ever. It wasn't the voice of a scared little girl. It was the voice of someone claiming her space. By the time the song ended, the gym wasn't quiet out of pity. It was quiet because no one dared to break what they'd just witnessed. Then, almost hesitantly, one teacher began to clap. Another joined. And then, like a wave rolling toward shore, the whole gym stood. Applause thundered through the rafters. I saw tears on Miss Parker's face. Even the boy who'd laughed first was clapping, now his cheeks flushed with shame. Ruby's lips parted in disbelief. She glanced at me just for a heartbeat, and I nodded, unable to speak. The man in the coat climbed the steps to the stage. The MC stepped back, letting him pass. When he reached Ruby, he smiled a small, knowing kind of smile. "You have a gift," he said into the mic, his voice calm but firm. And gifts like that deserve to be protected, not mocked. Whispers rippled through the audience. The principal looked both stunned and relieved that someone else had taken control. The man turned to the crowd. "My name is Daniel Carter. I produce music here in town. I've been doing this for a long time." He paused, scanning the rows of faces. "I came tonight because I heard there was a girl who reminded me of myself." He turned back to Ruby. "I grew up with nothing, too. Music saved my life, and I think it can save yours." Ruby stared, frozen. I don't have any money," she said softly, almost apologizing. Daniel smiled wider, shaking his head. "You've already paid," he said, "with your courage." The gym erupted again, this time louder. Not just applause, but cheers. People who'd mocked her moments ago were now standing on benches shouting her name. I saw one of the teachers wiping her eyes, another filming on her phone. Ruby's knees looked weak, but her smile grew until it filled her whole face. For the first time that night, she looked free. Daniel stepped aside, letting her take the mic one last time. She hesitated, then said into the microphone, "Thank you for listening." Her voice cracked on the last word, and the room answered with another wave of applause that shook the walls. When she walked off the stage, I met her halfway. She didn't say anything at first, just collapsed into my arms, still shaking. Her hair smelled like dust and nerves. I whispered, "You did it, baby." She pulled back, tears and laughter tangled in her breath. "I thought I was going to run. I know I said, but you didn't." Behind us, Daniel Carter waited. He handed her a business card, his tone gentle. "Come by the studio this week. Let's record that song properly." Ruby looked at me as if asking for permission. I nodded again, though my throat burned. "We'll be there." As we left the gym, people kept stopping her kids who'd laughed earlier now, offering compliments that sounded like apologies. "You were amazing," one girl said, eyes wide. Ruby thanked her, quietly polite as ever. Outside, the spring air felt cold against our skin. She held her guitar case tight to her chest as if it were something sacred. When we reached the car, she looked back at the glowing gym windows and whispered, "Did that really happen?" "Yes," I said, unlocking the door. "It did." She smiled, small and tired. "Then I guess I'm not the poor girl anymore." I turned toward her, brushing her hair behind her ear. "You never were," I said. "They just couldn't see it yet." She leaned her head on the window as we drove home, humming softly. The melody was the same one she'd played on stage, but now it sounded lighter, full of space, like she'd finally made peace with every cracked note, every broken thing that brought her here. And in that quiet drive through the dark streets of Jefferson, I realized something too. Maybe courage isn't about standing alone under bright lights. Maybe it's about staying when every instinct tells you to run and watching the world finally stop to listen. Within a week, Daniel Carter called. True to his word, he invited Ruby to his studio, a narrow space above a bookstore walls covered in faded gold records and scribbled lyrics. The air smelled like coffee and old vinyl. Ruby sat in front of the mic, her guitar across her lap, the same one that had once squeaked under gym lights. Daniel adjusted the mic stand, smiling. "Just sing it like you did that night," he said. "Don't chase perfect, chase honest." She nodded, took a breath, and began. I watched from the doorway, hands pressed together. The sound that came out was gentler than before, but it carried something new, quiet confidence. Every imperfection felt intentional, every crack in her voice a piece of truth. When the last note faded, Daniel didn't speak for a moment. Then he whispered, "That's it." They uploaded the song that same evening. Within days, messages started appearing. People from other towns saying they'd heard it, that it made them cry, that it reminded them of being overlooked and finding strength anyway. Ruby didn't brag. She just smiled and said, "Guess people listen when it's real." The next talent show came and went, but we didn't go back. She was busy writing another song this time about hope. And every night as I washed the dishes, I could hear her humming, steady, fearless, and finally free. Years later, I returned to that same gym for an assembly where Ruby was invited to speak. She walked onto the stage taller, now surer, carrying a new guitar, but wearing the same quiet smile. The banners on the walls had faded, the bleachers scuffed, but the air felt different. When she finished performing, she turned to the students and said, "Be brave even when they call you names." Her voice filled the room, calm but unshakable. I felt tears rise, the same kind that burned the night she first sang there. Afterward, she signed her name on the backstage wall where performers leave their mark, then handed the marker to a shy girl clutching a borrowed violin. If you've ever watched someone you love get torn down, stand up for them. Speak kindness when the world chooses cruelty. You never know whose life you might change.